April 1943. The war in Europe is at a turning point. The deserts of North Africa, once the domain of Rommel's Afrika Korps, have been cleansed by Allied fire and steel. Hundreds of thousands of German and Italian troops are now prisoners of war. For the first time, the Allies have a firm foothold from which to strike at what Winston Churchill has famously called the soft underbelly of Axis Europe. But a turning point is also a moment of extreme peril. One wrong move, one catastrophic miscalculation, and the momentum gained at such a terrible cost in blood could be lost in a matter of weeks. The question hanging heavy in the air in London and Washington is not if they should strike, but where. Look at a map of the Mediterranean in early 1943, and one place screams out as the next move: Sicily. It sits there like a football being kicked by the toe of Italy, a stepping stone between Tunis and the Italian mainland. To capture Sicily would be to shatter Axis control of the Mediterranean, opening the vital shipping lanes to Allied convoys and relieving the pressure on besieged Malta. It would provide the perfect launchpad for an invasion of Italy itself, forcing Hitler to divert precious divisions from the Russian front to defend his southern flank. Strategically, tactically, logistically, every single signpost points directly to Sicily, and that is precisely the problem. The Germans are not fools. Field Marshal Albert Kesselring, the astute German commander in the Mediterranean theater, can read a map just as well as Generals Eisenhower and Montgomery. He knows Sicily is the obvious target. The Abwehr, German military intelligence, has reached the same conclusion, and so the island is being transformed into a fortress. Veteran German divisions, battle-hardened from other fronts, are being moved into place. Coastal defenses are being strengthened daily. Machine gun nests dug into the cliffs. Artillery batteries zeroed in on the most likely landing. Beaches. The Luftwaffe is massing fighter and bomber squadrons on Sicilian airfields. The Germans are not just preparing for an invasion, they are laying a trap. They are waiting for the Allied armada to appear on the horizon, ready to turn the beaches of Sicily into a slaughterhouse that would make Dieppe look like a training exercise. The Allied planners know this. In the underground map rooms of Whitehall, they game out the invasion scenarios, and the casualty projections are horrifying. Tens of thousands of men lost in the first few days alone. The invasion could bog down, fail entirely, handing Hitler a propaganda victory of immense proportions and setting the entire war effort back by a year or more. A direct assault is a gamble of such terrifying stakes that it borders on suicidal. They need an alternative. They need to convince the Germans with absolute certainty that the blow is coming somewhere else. Not just a minor feint, not a rumor planted in a neutral capital, but a piece of intelligence so concrete, so irrefutable, that it would force Hitler himself to redeploy his best troops away from the real target. They need to make the Germans look east, towards Greece and the Balkans, or west towards Sardinia, while the largest amphibious force in history sails unopposed for Sicily. But how do you deliver a lie so convincing that it overrides all logic? How do you plant a fiction so perfectly crafted that it fools the notoriously meticulous German high command? This is a problem that cannot be solved by generals with pointers and maps. This requires a different kind of thinking, a darker, more subtle kind of warfare. The answer begins not in a cabinet room, but as a stray thought in a memorandum written years before by a brilliant, if eccentric, naval intelligence officer. The idea was audacious, morbid, and utterly unprecedented. It was filed away under a list of suggestions for unconventional warfare, almost too fantastical to be considered. The proposal: to use a dead body, dressed as an officer and carrying falsified papers, to deliver the ultimate piece of disinformation directly into the enemy's hands. Now, in the desperate spring of 1943, this macabre fantasy is about to become Britain's most vital and most secret operation of the war. They are about to create a ghost and task him with saving an army. The idea, once plucked from the realm of morbid fantasy, landed in a cramped, smoke-filled basement office in the Admiralty. This was Room 13, the nerve center for Section 17M, a small, highly secretive subsection of naval intelligence that dealt in the strange and the unorthodox. The air here was thick with the scent of damp tweed, stale pipe tobacco, and audacious schemes. It was in this crucible of lateral thinking that the plan was given a name, one of chillingly bureaucratic banality that belied its ghoulish nature: Operation Mincemeat. And it fell to two men, a perfect and peculiar pairing, to breathe life into it. The first was Ewen Montagu, a King's Council barrister in civilian life, now a lieutenant commander in the Naval Volunteer Reserve. He was sharp, meticulous, and possessed a lawyer's eye for the flaw in an argument and the weakness in a story. His mind worked with a cold analytical precision, perfectly suited to constructing a lie that could withstand the intense scrutiny of German intelligence. His partner was Flight Lieutenant Charles Cholmondeley of the Royal Air Force. Cholmondeley was the imaginative spark to Montagu's logical flame. He was an eccentric, a dreamer, the kind of man who saw possibilities where others saw only problems. It was Cholmondeley who had first championed the corpse idea, and his mind teemed with the granular details needed to make the impossible feel plausible. They were an odd couple, a fastidious lawyer and a quirky airman, bound by a shared appreciation for the absurd and a profound understanding that the most effective lies are built not on grand falsehoods, but on a mountain of tiny, verifiable truths. Their first and most formidable challenge was the most macabre. They needed a body, but not just any body. The criteria were brutally specific. The deceased had to be a man of military age. The cause of death had to be consistent with someone who had died from exposure and drowning after a plane crash at sea. This meant no obvious signs of trauma from a street accident, no telltale traces of disease. Ideally, the lungs would show signs of oedema. The body cooled in a way that mimicked death in the cold Atlantic. Most critically and most heartlessly, the man had to have no living relatives who would claim the body. No one to ask awkward questions or place a notice in the papers about a missing son or husband. The man they needed had to be, in essence, utterly alone in the world. Their search led them to the discreet and professional world of Sir Bentley Purchase, the coroner for the St Pancras district of London. In the quiet, clinical atmosphere of the morgue, surrounded by the anonymous tragedies of a great city at war, they found their man. His name was Glyndwr Michael. He was a Welsh labourer, a drifter, whose life had ended in a lonely London warehouse after ingesting rat poison. His death was a small, sad footnote, but it was perfect for their needs. The poison had done its work in a way that was difficult to detect in a cursory autopsy and produced effects that could, with a little creative interpretation by a cooperative pathologist, be mistaken for drowning. He had no known family. No one would miss Glyndwr Michael. He was the perfect ghost. A man who had been invisible in life would, in death, become the most important man in the war. He was carefully preserved in cold storage, a blank canvas upon which Montagu and Cholmondeley would paint their masterpiece of deception. Now the work of creation began. Glyndwr Michael, the Welsh drifter, had to be reborn as Captain, Acting Major, William Martin of Abwehr, the Royal Marines. The name was chosen for its sheer ordinariness. William Martin was solid, British and forgettable. There were thousands of Martins in the armed forces. One more would raise no flags. The rank of acting major was a masterstroke of psychological nuance. It made him senior enough to be entrusted with sensitive documents, but not so senior that his death would automatically trigger a high-level investigation. The Royal Marines were the perfect unit, their commando and amphibious expertise, making it entirely plausible for one of their officers to be involved in planning a major seaborne invasion. But a name and a rank do not make a man. The Germans were not amateurs. They were paranoid, methodical, and detail-obsessed. They would dissect Major Martin's identity, so Montagu and Cholmondeley's team set about building him a life, piece by painstaking piece. They were not merely forgers, they were authors, biographers of the non-existent. They imagined his personality, a dependable if slightly careless officer. This character trait was crucial. It would explain why he was hand-carrying sensitive documents rather than using a more secure channel. They filled his pockets with what the intelligence trade calls pocket litter, the mundane detritus of a real life. In their basement office, they held strange creative sessions, debating the contents of a dead man's wallet. They decided Martin needed a fiancée. They named her Pam. They procured a photograph of a pretty MI5 clerk to be Pam, and wrote 2 passionate, slightly wistful love letters for him to carry. They included a jeweler's bill for an engagement ring, dated just a few weeks prior. To add a touch of realism, a hint of life's everyday frustrations, they included a sternly worded letter from his bank manager regarding a small overdraft. They added ticket stubs from a recent West End theatre show, a book of stamps, a set of keys, and a letter from his father, full of paternal pride and anxiety. Every item was carefully aged, folded and worn, as if it had lived in a wallet for months. Every detail was a breadcrumb, a tiny piece of bait, designed to lead German intelligence to one conclusion. Major William Martin was real. He had a life, a love, a future that had been tragically cut short. And if the man was real, then the documents he carried must be real too. The legend was complete. All that remained was to give it a convincing death. With the man's identity meticulously constructed, the team turned to the heart of the deception, the documents themselves. This was the payload, the poisoned bait that the entire operation was designed to deliver. The contents had to be more than just convincing. They had to be utterly compelling. They had to be so significant, so seemingly authentic, that they would override the Germans' own logical deduction that Sicily was the true target. Creating this illusion required a level of craft that bordered on genius, involving the highest echelons of the British military, who became unwitting actors in this elaborate piece of theatre. The centrepiece was a personal letter, ostensibly from Lieutenant General Sir Archibald Nye, the Vice Chief of the Imperial General Staff, to General Sir Harold Alexander, the commander of Allied forces in North Africa. This was not a formal military order, but a chatty, informal correspondence between two old colleagues. This tone was a calculated piece of psychological warfare. A formal document might be suspected as a plant, but a personal letter complete with military gossip and inside jokes felt genuine. In the letter, Nye casually mentioned the upcoming Mediterranean operations. He referred to the invasion of Sicily, codenamed Operation Husky, as a diversionary attack. The real blow, he confided, would be a two-pronged assault. The main Allied force would land in Sardinia, codenamed Operation Brimstone, while a second force in Győr, conjunction with British troops in the Middle East, would strike at Greece. To lend this fiction an unshakable air of authority, the letter was written on General Nye's personal stationery and signed by Nye himself. He practiced forging his own signature for days to produce a version that looked slightly hurried, as if dashed off between important meetings. Every detail was scrutinized. Would two generals really communicate this way? Was the slang authentic? The planners even included a deliberately clumsy joke about the Royal Marines, a small touch designed to add a layer of human fallibility to the document, making it seem less like a perfectly polished piece of official correspondence and more like a real letter between two men. But a single letter, no matter how convincing, might not be enough. The Germans were masters of cross-referencing intelligence, so a second document was created to corroborate the first. This was a letter from Admiral Lord Louis Mountbatten, the dashing and well-connected Chief of Combined Operations, to Admiral Sir Andrew Cunningham, the Commander-in-Chief of the Mediterranean Fleet. Mountbatten's letter was a masterpiece of subtle misdirection. He was known for his sometimes impetuous nature, and the letter was crafted to reflect this. In it, he made a seemingly offhand remark welcoming Cunningham to the command of the upcoming Operation Brimstone, the fictitious Sardinia invasion. He even included a letter of introduction for Major Martin, officially seconding him to Mountbatten's staff for his expertise in amphibious landings. This not only explained Martin's presence on the flight to North Africa, but also directly linked him to the highest levels of Allied planning. These letters were then placed in an official War Office briefcase. The final critical touch was to chain the briefcase to Major Martin's wrist. This detail was designed to signal the immense importance of the documents to whoever found the body. It screamed, top secret. An officer wouldn't chain a routine bundle of papers to himself. This had to be something of vital national importance. The chain itself was a standard issue item, ensuring it wouldn't raise suspicion. The trap was now fully assembled: a dead officer, a meticulously crafted life story, and a briefcase containing what appeared to be the Allies' most secret plans for the summer of 1943. The next challenge was delivery. The body couldn't just be dumped anywhere. It had to wash ashore, in a place where it was certain to be found by officials who were known to be sympathetic to the Germans. The location had to be plausible for a plane crash en route from Britain to North Africa. After careful analysis of shipping lanes, air routes and coastal currents, the perfect spot was chosen: the coast of Huelva in southern Spain. Spain, under the rule of General Franco, was officially neutral, but its neutrality was a porous, cynical thing. The country was riddled with German spies, and the Abwehr operated with near impunity. The German consul in Huelva was a known and highly effective intelligence agent. British intelligence knew from experience that the Spanish authorities, while outwardly cooperative with the British, frequently shared any interesting findings with their German friends. Huelva was the perfect backdoor into the German intelligence network. The final delicate piece of the puzzle was the mode of transport. The body of Major Martin, now sealed in a specially designed airtight canister packed with dry ice, had to be transported to the Spanish coast without being detected. The canister was labeled optical instruments to deflect any casual curiosity. The task fell to the submarine HMS Seraph. On the night of 19th April 1943, the canister was loaded onto the submarine in Scotland. The submarine's crew were told only that they were carrying a top-secret weather monitoring device. Only the captain and a handful of officers knew the true, grim nature of their cargo. As the Seraph slipped silently out of the Holy Loch and into the dark waters of the Atlantic, the final act of the drama was set in motion. Aboard the submarine, the body of a man who in life had been a nobody was on its final journey. He carried with him a fiction that had the power to reshape the map of the war, to save thousands of lives, and to fool an entire empire. Everything now depended on the ocean currents, the vigilance of a Spanish fisherman, and the paranoid professionalism of the German Abwehr. The ghost was about to walk. In the pre-dawn blackness of 30th April 1943, HMS Seraph surfaced with ghost-like silence in the choppy waters off the coast of Huelva. The air was cold, thick with the salt spray of the Atlantic. On the submarine's deck, under the faint glow of a hooded lamp, a small group of officers worked with a grim, hurried efficiency. The canister was opened. Lieutenant Commander Bill Jewell, the Seraph's captain, and his officers carefully removed the body of Major Martin. He was stiff from the cold, his uniform immaculate. They performed one final check. The briefcase was securely chained to his wrist. The pocket litter was in place. A life jacket was inflated, but not too much, to simulate a man who had struggled and failed to stay afloat. This was the point of no return. Ewen Montagu and Charles Cholmondeley were not present, their work done. The fate of their creation was now in the hands of these sailors. With a quiet solemnity that felt almost like a burial at sea, Captain Jewell recited the 39th Psalm. I will keep my mouth with a bridle, while the wicked is before me. Lord, make me to know mine end, and the measure of my days what it is, that I may know how frail I am. It was a fitting, poignant farewell for the man who never was. Then they gently committed the body to the sea. The tide was turning, the currents calculated to carry him directly towards the shore. The Seraph's crew watched for a moment as the dark shape bobbed in the waves, a lonely messenger on a mission of deception. Then the submarine submerged, its metal hull slipping beneath the waves, leaving no trace it had ever been there. Several hours later, just as the sun was rising, a Spanish fisherman named José Antonio Rey Maria was checking his nets near the mouth of the Huelva River. He saw something floating in the water. Drawing closer, he realized with a shock that it was the body of a man in uniform. He towed the body to shore and immediately alerted the local authorities. Operation Mincemeat had passed its first critical test. The bait was on the hook. The news traveled quickly. The Spanish military took custody of the body. The British naval attaché in Madrid, Captain Alan Hilgarth, was officially informed. He immediately began to play his part in the elaborate charade. He sent a series of increasingly frantic, top-secret telegrams back to the Admiralty in London, demanding the immediate return of the briefcase found with the body. These telegrams were sent using a code that the British knew the Germans had partially broken. They were designed to be intercepted and read. The message they sent was clear. The contents of that briefcase were of monumental importance to the British, and they were desperate to get them back before anyone else saw them. Meanwhile, in Huelva, a Spanish naval doctor performed an autopsy. As British intelligence had hoped, the examination was cursory. The doctor concluded that the man had died from drowning and had been in the water for several days. There was no sign of foul play. The fiction held. The Spanish, however, were in no hurry to return the briefcase. As anticipated, copies of the precious documents were made. Under the watchful eye of the meticulous German agent, Adolf Klaus, the letters were carefully steamed open, photographed, and then resealed with painstaking care. The film was rushed to Madrid, then flown by diplomatic courier directly to Berlin. The package landed on the desk of Baron von Roene, the head of FHW, Fremde Heere West, the German army's intelligence branch for the Western Front. Von Roene was a brilliant analyst, but also a staunch anti-Nazi who was secretly part of the resistance against Hitler. In a strange twist of fate, he saw the mincemeat documents not as a deception, but as genuine intelligence that could be used to undermine the Führer's strategic decisions. He authenticated the documents, adding his own considerable authority to their credibility, and passed them up the chain of command. The file reached the one man it was always intended for, Adolf Hitler. He studied the photographs of the letters, the maps, the entire fabricated story. The sheer weight of the detail, the corroboration between the Nye and Mountbatten letters, the frantic British attempts to recover the briefcase, it all painted a picture of absolute authenticity. This was the gotcha moment German intelligence had been praying for. It confirmed their suspicions that the Allies were planning something big in the Mediterranean, but it completely upended their assumptions about the target. The logic of a Sicily invasion was powerful. But this tangible proof, seemingly fallen from the sky, was irresistible. On the 12th of May, Hitler met with Grand Admiral Dönitz, the head of the German Navy. Convinced by the mincemeat documents, he declared that the discovery of the British courier has made it plain that the attack will be directed against Sardinia and the Peloponnese. He dismissed Sicily as a mere feint. The decision was made. The order went out. It was a strategic shift of seismic proportions. One of the Wehrmacht's most formidable units, the 1st Panzer Division, was ordered to move from France, not to Italy, but to Greece to counter the expected invasion. 2 other panzer divisions already in Sicily were ordered to prepare for redeployment. Field Marshal Erwin Rommel, the celebrated Desert Fox, was dispatched to Athens to take command of a new army group. A flotilla of German R-boats, fast patrol craft, was moved from Sicily to the Aegean Sea. Minefields around Sicily were stripped to reinforce the waters around Greece and Sardinia. The Germans were not just looking the wrong way, they were actively dismantling the fortress they had so carefully constructed on the real target. The Allied deception had worked beyond the wildest dreams of its creators, the ghost of Major. Martin was now moving armies. As May turned into June, the German war machine diligently rearranged itself according to the script written in Room 13. While Rommel was setting up his new headquarters in Greece and panzer columns were rumbling towards the Balkans, the Allies were assembling the largest amphibious force ever seen in human history. In ports across North Africa, from Oran to Alexandria, an immense armada took shape. Over 2,500 vessels, battleships, cruisers, destroyers, troop, transports and landing craft, prepared to carry 160,000 British, American and Canadian soldiers, along with thousands of vehicles and tons of supplies, across the sea to Sicily. The scale of the build-up was so vast that complete secrecy was impossible. German reconnaissance planes spotted the activity, but thanks to Major Martin, they interpreted it all through a lens of deception. They saw the vast fleet and concluded it was the elaborate feint designed to distract them from the real attacks on Greece and Sardinia. On the 14th of May, the Spanish finally returned Major Martin's briefcase and personal effects to the British. Ewen Montagu and his team examined them under a microscope. Their forensic experts confirmed that the letters had been opened and resealed. The deception was complete. To close the loop, Major William Martin was buried with full military honours in the cemetery in Huelva. The British naval attaché attended, a solemn figure in dress uniform, adding a final poignant touch of authenticity to the grand lie. His tombstone, which stands to this day, reads, William Martin, born 29th March 1907, died 24th April 1943, beloved son of John Glyndwr Martin and the late Antonia Martin of Cardiff, Wales. It was a final, fictional epitaph for the man who never was Glyndwr Michael. The War Office even had notices of his death published in the Times, a last impeccable detail for any German agent checking the records. In the early hours of July 10, 1943, Operation Husky was launched. Under the cover of darkness, the Allied fleet bore down on the southern coast of Sicily. The men aboard the landing craft braced themselves for a maelstrom of fire. They had been briefed to expect fierce resistance, to fight for every inch of beach. Instead, what they found was an eerie, almost baffling lack of opposition. The formidable coastal batteries they had feared were undermanned. The beaches were defended by second-rate Italian divisions who, demoralized and poorly equipped, surrendered in droves. The feared German panzer divisions were nowhere to be seen. The initial landings were a stunning success, achieved with remarkably few casualties. The element of surprise was total. When news of the invasion reached Hitler's headquarters, there was a moment of shocked disbelief, followed by frantic confusion. For the first crucial 48 hours, Hitler and his high command remained convinced that Sicily was a feint. They refused to divert the main reinforcements from Greece and Sardinia, certain that the main blow was still to come elsewhere. This delay was a gift of incalculable value to the Allies. It allowed them to consolidate their beachheads, land heavy equipment, and begin their push inland before the Germans could mount a coordinated and powerful counterattack. By the time the German High Command finally realized they had been catastrophically duped, it was too late. The Allies were already ashore in overwhelming force. The audacious panzer divisions that had been moved or were preparing to move were hastily ordered back to Sicily, but they were now forced to fight a reactive battle, plugging gaps in a crumbling front line rather than executing a prepared defense. The fight for Sicily was still hard and bloody. It took 38 days of brutal combat to secure the island, but the strategic surprise achieved by Operation Mincemeat had irrevocably tipped the scales. It saved tens of thousands of Allied lives and shortened the campaign by weeks. possibly months. The fallout from the deception was immense. The successful invasion of Sicily led directly to the downfall of Mussolini and the surrender of Italy, forcing Germany to occupy its former ally and divert dozens of divisions to a new front it had never intended to fight. The lie crafted in a London basement had not only taken an island, it had knocked a key pillar out from under the Axis alliance. After the war, when the full story came to light, the sheer audacity of the plan was celebrated. Ewen Montagu wrote a best-selling book, The Man Who Never Was, which was later turned into a successful film. But for decades, the true identity of the body remained a closely guarded secret. It was only in 1996 that an amateur historian uncovered the truth, and the name of Glyndwr Michael was finally added to the grave in Huelva. A sad, lonely man who had died in obscurity was at last given his due as the unlikely, unwitting hero of one of the greatest deceptions in military history. Operation Mincemeat stands as a timeless lesson in the art of war, that sometimes the most powerful weapon is not a bomb or a bullet, but a perfectly told story. It proved that in the high-stakes game of espionage and counterintelligence, imagination can be more decisive than firepower, and a single well-placed lie can change the course of history. The legacy of Operation Mincemeat extends far beyond the successful capture of Sicily. It became a benchmark, a case study in the art of strategic deception that would influence intelligence operations for decades to come. What Montagu and Cholmondeley achieved was more than just a clever ruse. They executed a symphony of disinformation, perfectly harmonizing forensic science, psychological manipulation, and bureaucratic procedure to create a lie that was structurally flawless. The operation's success reinforced a crucial lesson for Allied planners. The war against Germany was not just a physical struggle for territory, but a cognitive battle for the enemy's mind. The operation's influence was felt most profoundly in the planning for the most critical Allied undertaking of the entire war, the D-Day landings in Normandy. The deception plan for D-Day, codenamed Operation Fortitude, was essentially Operation Mincemeat scaled up to an epic, continental level. Instead of creating a single phantom officer, Fortitude created entire phantom armies. Under the umbrella of the fictitious 1st U.S. Army Group FUSAG, the Allies built a vast ghost army in the southeast of England. They deployed thousands of inflatable rubber tanks and dummy aircraft, built fake supply depots, and generated a massive volume of bogus radio traffic, all designed to convince the Germans that the main invasion would strike at the Pas de Calais, the shortest sea crossing to France. Just as Major Martin's pocket litter gave him a believable backstory, FUSAG was given a charismatic and famous commander, General George S. Patton. The Germans knew Patton was the Allies' best tank commander, and they couldn't imagine he would be sidelined from the main invasion. His very presence in Kent was a piece of psychological bait, as irresistible as the letters in Martin's briefcase. The principles were identical. Understand your opponent's expectations and prejudices, and feed them a meticulously detailed fiction that confirms those biases. Hitler and his generals expected the invasion at Calais. Fortitude gave them an overwhelming body of evidence to prove they were right. The success of Mincemeat had given Allied planners the confidence to gamble on a deception of such breathtaking scale, and it worked. Even after the landings began in Normandy on June 6, 1944, Hitler held his best panzer divisions in reserve near Calais for several crucial weeks, still waiting for Patton's real army to attack. That delay, brought by a deception rooted in the mincemeat philosophy, was arguably the single most important factor in the success of the Normandy landings. Beyond its military impact, Operation Mincemeat also tells a deeper, more human story about the nature of war. It highlights the strange and often uncomfortable moral calculus required in a total conflict. The architects of the plan took a human body, the remains of a man whose life had been marked by tragedy and misfortune, and repurposed it as an instrument of war. Glyndwr Michael was not a volunteer. He was a pawn, his earthly vessel used. Without his consent for a greater good he would never understand. There is an undeniable ethical chill to the story, a reminder that victory in war often demands actions that, in peacetime, would be considered ghoulish or profane. Yet, this single, morally ambiguous act saved thousands of young men from dying on the beaches of Sicily. It is a stark illustration of the brutal utilitarianism of warfare, where one man's desecrated corpse can be weighed against the lives of entire divisions. The story also stands as a monument to a particular kind of British ingenuity. In a war dominated by the industrial might of America and the brutal manpower of the Soviet Union, Britain often found its greatest contribution in the realm of the cerebral. in code-breaking at Bletchley Park, in the development of radar, and in the dark arts of deception and espionage. Operation Mincemeat was a product of a unique cultural environment, one that valued eccentricity, rewarded lateral thinking, and had a deep appreciation for the power of a well-crafted narrative. It was a plan conceived not by military dogmatists, but by a lawyer and an eccentric airman, men who understood that fooling the enemy was, at its heart, an act of storytelling. They were authors, and their protagonist, Major William Martin, was their most successful creation. Today, the grave in Huelva remains a quiet, poignant memorial to this strange episode. It is a tribute to two men: the real man, Glyndwr Michael, whose lonely death gave him an unlikely and anonymous form of immortality, and the fictional man William Martin, the ghost who walked out of the sea and into the mind of Adolf Hitler, changing the course of the Second World War with a briefcase full of lies. It serves as a lasting reminder that in the grand, violent sweep of history, sometimes the most significant events are not the thunderous clashes of armies, but the quiet, meticulous whispers of a well-planned deception.